look, the biggest news right now, NFL wise, is that the Washington Commanders, the sale of the Washington Commanders has now been finalized.
Yeah.
Up until the last minute, man, there were those rumors that something might happen, that it might fall through. Like, people were just scared to death that somehow, some way, Dan Snyder might find a way to still be able to, to own this team. And it didn't happen. And so this was a huge week for Commanders fans, and talk about enthusiasm. I mean, they have really come out in force. Dan Snyder has owned the Washington Commanders since 1999. So it has been a long run, 24 years for him to be in there, and one of the least liked owners in professional sports. And unfortunately, when you see what's happened with that franchise, it's been a drop off, man. And we've talked about it on previous episodes, but you got to think that Josh Harris and Mitchell Rales and Magic Johnson and this ownership group couldn't be more in the opposite direction of Dan Snyder if they tried. This is just, it seems like a way better ownership group.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. I mean, if it was like said that in his tenure of being an owner of the team, I think they had 4 big lawsuits versus playoff wins, which was like 2. Yeah, and I mean, like in his 24 years of, I mean, come on, you think about it. The at one time Washington Redskins, and now, new name Commanders, and like we discussed, like maybe even a newer name that's going to be brought forth, with this team. They were once a storied franchise, they had crazy. Everything. They had the head coaches there. They had the play, I mean, it's crazy to think how far they were able to fall off in 24 years under one person in particular ownership, during his tenure. And it's a sad story for a franchise that they have great fans. They have a city that gets behind them and supports them. And that wasn't the case towards the end of what was going on with him. Yeah.
Well, it's crazy. You touched on how far they've fallen and how things have changed. So as I mentioned, Dan Snyder bought the team in 1999. Yeah. In 2008, I was wrong about this. In 2008, the Washington, at that point Redskins, now Commanders, were first in the NFL for attendance for their games. The number 1 team in the entire NFL in 2008. And now in 2022, last season, they were 32nd in the NFL. Dead last.
My word.
So, I mean, that is an incredible fall. So we're not even talking from 99 to 2023 or 22. We're talking from 08 to 22. It's been that much of a change from the most popular, the most, the highest attendance in the NFL to dead last. And look, I mean, there's lots of excuses, right? I mean, that stadium that they play in, we've talked about on this show several times. It's one of, if not the worst stadiums in the NFL.
Is that right? I've never been. I know you've had the privilege to attend, so I got to believe you see a nice thing, it's a nice thing. But since you're saying not so nice, I got to believe you.
I can tell you, and we did talk about this on a previous episode before, but, I have, just through some business things, I've had the opportunity to be in just about every single inch of FedEx Field.
Wow. Yep.
Beyond just a fan, I've seen the owner suite, like the picture. So that they released a picture of, Josh Harris and Magic Johnson and everyone like sitting in the owner suite, like talking, and somebody I've stood in that suite, so in Dan Snyder's suite. And so I know the setup. I had a suite at the stadium, and I can tell you, it's bizarre. It's weird to go into an NFL stadium and see just paint peeling off the walls all over the place. Of course, you saw so many of these, Twitter and TikTok videos of the water leaking on fans, all kinds of stuff, just terrible things. But that's it. And it's just an old stadium. I mean,
sure.
They have to take some responsibility for the disrepair, but also it is just an old stadium, and it's been around for a long time, and it's in the middle of nowhere. So parking and everything is incredibly difficult. Like we've talked about on the show before, but it's like they took a helicopter in and then just dropped a stadium, and they have a whole bunch of just little single lane and 2 lane roads that go into it. So It's horrible. to try to get in and out of. Horrible. And
that,
I mean,
don't you think that though that's, when you go to an NFL game, being that there's so many few for, like, if you're a home, fan of the Commanders and you wanted to go to a game, the experience is staying there all day, tailgating and doing that. And if it's a pain in the butt to get in and out, you're cheapening the experience as time goes, man. That stuff starts adding up.
100%. Yeah. I mean, it's brutal. Like, I'll give you an example here. And in fact, I'm going to do it in real time here. Let me show you. And you can tell me if I'm exaggerating in any way. So you can see the image on my screen, correct?
Yeah.
So there's FedEx Field and the parking around it, right? Now, as you zoom out from it, what you realize is it really is this road, this road, this road, and this road. These are the ways that you get in. Now, if you're getting off of 495 and you're getting off over here, what I can tell you is, because I've been here, like, this road here is a nothing little, I mean, here we go. To a street view.
Oh my gosh.
And so you're breaking off of the parking lots here and everything else to try to be able to get in and out of there. And it is just, and people will walk for, because again, I mean, you're seeing parking. That's because there's a church there, so it's just an insane thing to have to experience. And yeah, when you go to that stadium, it is really in the middle of nowhere. And that's how you feel. You feel like this is, you see, these are residential neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So there aren't any major arteries to be able to get around into any of these places.
That's so wild. Yeah, I was about to make that, mention that it's just like it's a field that's in the middle of a neighborhood, and where you would think that usually they put these facilities for teams in areas where they're fast growing, or the potential to have, it feed the neighborhood, so to speak, or feed the area with businesses and things of that want to be around there so they can grow with the team. And obviously there's not that happening there.
Nothing. I mean, when I tell you that there's nothing there, you couldn't walk to anything that I can even think of. I mean, there's like, I only happen to see it on the map. That's why I know, is that like you get off 495, there's like a Chick-fil-A there.
Oh yeah, right.
That's miles away. That's not close. And what's really crazy is you go, and I mean, when you get off of 495 there, or depending on which way you're coming in, you may need to drive 3, 4, 5 miles, right? Not very far. It can take 2 hours to be able to get there. It's just a disaster. It's an impossible place to navigate. And that's why no matter what happens, there's no chance that this new ownership group is going to keep that stadium for any longer than they absolutely have to. Would make sense.
Would I now, I don't know this to be fact, but did the NFL want any clauses with the new ownership group to maybe produce something that was going to be more attractive to the fans, as far as putting it more in the city, putting it in more like, are they responsible for maybe creating a new place to play football? Like, is that on the horizon? Do the future fans of this team, to who knows what the name is, Commanders now, are they going to have a place to call home in the near future? Is there a rumor of that in your area?
Yeah. So here's what I can tell you. The back before all of this happened, so go back, a year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that, when I was more involved and with the team and in the know, they had an agreement on a new stadium. I actually saw some of the designs of the stadium, the preliminary designs that were done, and it was impressive.
Yeah.
And they were having conversations with Maryland, DC, and Virginia on location.
Okay.
And so there was some talk about it going back to the old RFK Stadium site. And RFK Stadium, which of course is the stadium that they used to play in back in the day, that now is, they have a bunch of different things that they're, different structures, buildings over there and things. But there has been a lot of talk of that happening. And if you look at RFK, And in fact, I will bring that up here quick as well, because it's pretty clear to see a difference very, very fast when you see where RFK Stadium is.
Oh,
so yeah. RFK, which is still here, and they've just kind of built things around it. It's actually in DC.
That's a plus.
So yeah. So you figure, I mean, the White House is here, and it's right here. So it's great. And the other thing that makes a lot of sense from this location, I'll zoom out just a little further here, is when you're looking at this location here and you're crossing over so easily into Maryland. I mean, first of all, that's 295. So the ability to get around and be right off of the Beltway like that is huge. And you have lots of other stuff that's not far away, National Harbor and all of that stuff, with the MGM that they have there and everything. So you just have all of these other things. And there has been talk about that as another site of possibility as well, like something, closer over to where National Harbor is. But realistically, if you want it to be in DC, I mean, that's DC.
Sure.
So, and it's a nice spot, I mean, you do have some, some water right there, and you have, easy kind of access in from a wide variety of places in DC. So long story short, this makes a lot of sense. There was also talk of the team buying up some land in Northern Virginia to the west, and building out a whole thing there. So for years, the Commanders, the Redskins, the Washington football team, whatever you want to call them, they've always had training camps in Virginia. Their training camp is in Richmond, Virginia. So you figure that's about an hour and a half or so away from DC. And so that was where they always did it. So, there was always talk about, could they convince the Commanders to come further south to possibly put in a stadium, but you can't come down 2 hours away and consider yourself the Washington, football team. So
exactly.
Yeah. So they got to stay in that general area up there. But I think RFK makes a lot of sense, particularly if this Josh Harris group wants to kind of bring them back to their former glory. Sure. Why not go right back to the site of, all of their success, but then just rebuild a beautiful stadium. And I know that originally the plan had been that they were going to build a new stadium. Dan Snyder had personally committed up to $2 billion of his own money to get the stadium built. The rest of it would be, of course, through, taxpayers and stuff. And they wanted it done in time for the World Cup in, I believe it's 2026.
Yeah, it's happening soon. Yeah.
Yeah. But now, since all of this stuff has happened, clearly it has delayed all of that. So there's no chance that a new stadium will be ready in that period of time.
Sure.
So they're going to be continuing to play at FedEx Field for the foreseeable future.
Okay. Well, I'm curious. I'm just curious as to what they would do, because I know their fan base is, they're hungry. They want to do something, and they need something. And I think if they do bring it back to DC, one, it could revitalize the area. It can make the area more, more desirable, or businesses to want to come and hang out and do something. Yeah. So I really, truly hope that they do something of that, for them. It's just going to help them out and help the fan base. And like you said, maybe give them a whole new old feel, if you may. You know what I'm saying? It's a new ownership, new branding. And if they decide to change the name to something else, so be it. I think they deserve it, and I think they'll hopefully do right by the fans and do something.
Yeah, and at least with Josh Harris, there's a history there. The guy owns the Philadelphia 76ers. He's owned teams. He does good work. He seems to run a team the right way. I saw earlier, one of the things that Dan Snyder got in trouble for, I don't know if you had seen this or not. Dan Snyder got caught selling expired peanuts at the stadium. At FedEx Field, there was a now shut down airline called Independence Air. They had gone out of business. They hadn't created or sent any shipments of peanuts in at least a year. Dan Snyder bought up all of the old peanuts from Independence Air for pennies on the dollar to be able to sell them at FedEx Field. So it's just that type of thing, you know. It's indicative of the whole thing.
Can you be surprised? Like, I mean, from everything that you're hearing about how this all went down and who he is as a person. Again, we don't know him personally. Don't sound like I ever would care to want to know him personally. But yeah, I mean, just you can't put it past the guy from the things that are coming out little by little, and I'm sure, you know, more to come. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, the way this whole thing went down with the lawsuits, the emails, Gruden, and just it's just funky, and it wasn't pretty. And I hope, like, again, I said it a few seconds ago. Let's move on to bigger and better things for them, and let's get football is better when Washington is doing their thing. Period. Yeah. That whole division is better when you have the rivalries of Dallas going after Washington and Philadelphia, and like that whole thing is just fun for football, and we all get to, you know, rejoice because then those games come Sunday are just that much more meaningful.
Yeah. No, I can't argue with you, man. I mean, you said it exactly right. Dan Snyder's one of those guys I'm so curious to meet. Just because I would be so curious to know, like, you know, you hear so much about him. It's like his reputation precedes him. So what would he actually be like? Because I will say, you know, I've had the opportunity to spend some time on a couple occasions with Tanya Snyder, his wife.
Okay.
And super nice, incredibly sweet lady. We had a great time talking, laughed and stuff. Like it was almost one of those things where it was shocking that she was so cool because you know who she's married to. And you're like, wait a minute, I can't square this in my mind. And he was actually supposed to be there, but this was shortly after all hell started breaking loose with, you know, allegations and sexual harassment and all kinds of things. So he was kind of laying low for obvious reasons.
Smart.
But yeah, I mean, you look at that and you think like, man, I wonder, you hear so many bad things. But that guy has friends in his life. I mean, he has to be like, he can't be all bad, right? But I would be curious.
Sometimes I wonder if these uber wealthy people just surround themselves with yes men and people that just don't challenge them about things. And maybe he falls into that category. You know, who knows? Yeah. I feel bad, you know, how it all. Well, I guess I can't feel bad. I guess, you know, he did it to himself, right? All of this is just evident of things that he's done, and it's just coming to light. And, you know, I don't know. I know, I know it's going to be fun in the future. That's what I'll say.
Well, I'll say this too. I mean, look, it's lest anyone feel bad for Dan Snyder.
Oh, right, yeah.
He bought the Washington football team, the Washington Redskins, in 1999 for $800 million. $800 million. He now sells it 24 years later for $6.05 billion.
That's some chatter, dude. That's some chatter. I mean, the return on your investment there is insane. Yeah, that's insane, man. And but here's the thing that is wild to think about. So a few years back, when the Clippers sold, why did they sell? Is because their owner said some things inappropriately. Right. He gets in trouble. He probably bought the team then for the Clippers. I mean, I think it was something absurd, like $27 million. He ends up selling the Clippers for $2 billion. You know what I mean? Like, it's crazy that these people are ending up getting financially rewarded for things, you know. Yeah, it takes money to make money, I guess. And he had the money to buy it then, and he's making a hell of a lot of money now.
So just to be able to answer your question, Donald Sterling bought the Clippers for $13.5 million. Now, I will say this. I mean, that was, in all fairness, 40 some years ago, you know, but still, it was 42, I think, years ago that Donald Sterling bought the Clippers. But yeah, he bought it for $13 million and sold it for $2 billion. I mean,
all I can think of with that being that it was 42 years ago was the whole like Jackie Moon with the Tropics. Like, were they playing to get into the NBA or in the ABA when the merger was happening? And he just so happened to have $13 million laying around. And holy cow, that's insane. 13 mil.
Yes, wow. $13.5 million, man. And here's what's really crazy too. And you started to touch on this that I think is really an interesting point. Is that when you look at Dan Snyder having bought an NFL team for $800 million and selling it for over $6 billion. You look at Michael Jordan buying an NBA team for $275 million and selling it for $3 billion, over $3 billion. You look at what these guys, and they're failing teams.
Yeah.
Teams aren't good, right? So the scary thing is that is a dangerous message to send to owners of teams that you don't need to worry about having your team be successful. You don't have to have a good team. You know, for years, that was always the knock on the Bengals, was that Mike Brown was so cheap, the owner of the Bengals. Like, they were never going to spend any money. They didn't care about being successful because he was just making money from owning the team, and that was good enough.
Sure.
And now, of course, obviously, their fortunes have changed after, 40 years in the wilderness. But the reality is that when you own one of these professional sports teams now, winning, I mean, it's great. You just have to hope as a fan that you have an owner that just cares about winning on his own.
Sure.
Because from a business perspective, they're making insane money without winning. I mean, the Charlotte Hornets were one of the worst teams in the NBA since Jordan has owned it. And he, many X'd his money from $275 million over $3 billion. You look at Dan Snyder, again, I understand it's over 24 years. But from $800 million to $6.05 billion, and they're terrible teams that actually got worse when those people took over as owners, and it doesn't matter. They're shattering records,
Yeah.
I mean, and to give you an idea of how much those records have been, broken, when you look, because now the Washington sale is the highest dollar amount ever paid for a North American sports team.
Yeah.
And actually, I think for a professional sports team in general, I don't think there's any price that's ever been paid more than that. So
not that I've ever heard of anything near that. But I mean, think about the other owners too. Now they hear that number, right? Like what then is your franchise worth if you are a successful winning franchise? Like the number just keeps going up. And that to me is just
Denver
crazy.
looks like a steal because the Waltons were able to buy Rob Walton, the heir from Walmart. He was able to buy Denver for $4.35 billion. The Denver Broncos. So how in the world you got the Denver Broncos for $4.35 and Washington sells for a full $1.5 billion more a year later? I mean, it's hard to believe that it could be going up at that rate, but it is.
Yeah, so. And not to lump Michael Jordan in with Snyder and Sutherland, he obviously was selling for different reasons, but definitely his return on his investment is something to be awed at, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Dan Snyder has a 656% return on his investment.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, look, if you were putting $10 in, you'd be like, oh, I'm pretty happy with a 650. When you put 800 million in and you get that same 656% return on your investment, you're cleaning up at that point.
Yeah.